My ex-wife believed she could utterly ruin my life, and she succeeded. But you know what? Karma has swung back my way, and a few years later, I'm finally getting my share of sweet revenge. I retaliated against my ex-wife after she devastated my life. When I unexpectedly encountered her at my new workplace, my anger flared, and I harbored a strong desire to exact vengeance right then and there. 7 years hadn't been sufficient time for me to recover from the havoc she had wreaked. I lost everything and had to start from scratch after she turned everyone against me. I even relocated to a different state to escape her. Yet there she was, working at the latest company where I held a senior executive managerial position. My history with Charlene was long and tumultuous, and I would have been content never to cross paths with her again following our divorce. I met Charlene when I was young and running a successful startup business. We married just a year after we began dating because she was pregnant with my child. Our relationship grew strained after the birth of our daughter. Despite the baby's tender age, Charlene spent most of her time at her parents' home. Despite my numerous complaints and efforts to involve her parents, they sided with her and accused me of placing too much pressure on her due to her depression. Over time, our communication deteriorated, and our discussions were limited to matters concerning our child. When our daughter was a few months old, I discovered that she wasn't mine, and Charlene had been having an affair with a colleague for some time. That very night, I expelled her from the house and initiated divorce proceedings a few days later. During that period, I was the sole provider for her since she chose not to return to work after giving birth. Despite this, I didn't cut off her access to financial resources because I recognized that it wasn't the child's fault. Legally, I wasn't even obligated to provide her with any financial support in the divorce. I possessed evidence of her deception over the years, but she countered by falsely accusing me of emotional abuse and controlling behavior. Her parents testified dishonestly, claiming that she had once visited their home with visible bruises. Regrettably, due to her manufactured evidence and false testimony from friends who were present, I had to relinquish half of my business and our house in the divorce proceedings, largely due to societal expectations placed on men. My previously thriving business suffered a significant blow due to the allegations against me. My own family sided with her, influenced by her acting skills, leaving me without family support and facing a failing business. Additionally, I had to make substantial financial payments as part of the settlement. In the local town, I became undesirable for business collaborations or employment, forcing me to relocate while burdened with considerable debt from attempting to salvage my business. Meanwhile, she retained the house and financial assets. For about a year, I worked at a company that paid well, but the majority of my earnings went towards clearing my debts. I refrained from inquiring about her life, and instead focused on rebuilding my own. This strategy paid off, as 7 years after our divorce, I had risen to a senior executive position in a highly profitable company. My company had recently acquired another firm, and my role involved overseeing the CEO of the acquired company, facilitating the transition and integration of that company into our brand. On my initial day back at the office, I encountered her. Despite appearing considerably older, she remained the same person. I felt such anger that I contemplated requesting my company to remove her from her position. Over the years, I had become estranged from most of my family because they believed I was an abusive man. Never mind that I never laid a hand on her, and she had manipulated me into marrying her. After our initial encounter, she visited my office, putting on a friendly facade and offering to guide me around as a familiar face. I suspected she was aware of her precarious situation and believed that ingratiating herself with me might help. I informed her that I had already taken a tour and asked her to leave me alone. Despite this, my anger lingered throughout the day, and I contemplated firing her. However, despite having the authority, I couldn't terminate her employment without a valid reason. From that day onward, my primary objective at the office became giving her a hard time. After reviewing her file, I learned that she had been working there for the past 2 years and had been competent at her job. It appeared that the money she had extracted from me had finally run out. I did my utmost to make her professional life unpleasant. Initially, I issued her a handwritten warning for being late to work, even though her boss had recommended a verbal reprimand. She had cited her daughter's illness as the reason, but I was indifferent. Later that day, when she made a minor error in a report I had requested, I forced her to redo it and reprint everything, fully aware that the printer was malfunctioning. which meant she had to toil in a non-air-conditioned room filled with dust for an extended period. Then, as everyone was preparing to leave for the day, I compelled her to remain in our surplus office, assigning her a task that was utterly pointless, simply to waste her time. A few days later, my assistant from the other company joined our team, but there was a shortage of offices. I ensured that Lean relinquished her office and relocated to a small, stuffy room devoid of proper ventilation that nobody else wanted. I was well aware that it was the height of summer, and the sweltering heat was unbearable. When she had to pack her belongings, she appeared infuriated, and I half expected her to confront me physically. I overheard her venting about me to some of her coworkers, which only prompted me to assign her additional tasks that she struggled to manage. She consistently worked through lunch breaks because I incessantly demanded more and more from her. She was also in contention for a promotion, a position coveted by everyone in the office. Recognizing her as the most deserving candidate due to her recent outstanding performance and her boss's commendation, I suggested that someone with more tenure at the company be promoted instead of her. Following the announcement of the promotion recipient, she stormed into my office and vowed to make me pay for my actions. A few days later, my personal history became common knowledge throughout the office after an anonymous email was circulated to everyone. My superiors were already aware of my divorce, and I had no criminal record, so they simply instructed me to stay home for a few days. I enlisted the help of a tech expert to trace the email, and unsurprisingly, it led back to her. I filed a complaint against her for slander, which brought her significant trouble within the company. Our company had a strict rule prohibiting slander and gossip about employees' personal lives. If I had been on the committee, I would have advocated for her termination, but due to my proximity to the case, I had to recuse myself. She had to stay home for several days due to the email she had sent. I also narrowly avoided losing my position within the company as a result. For a few days, I left her in peace while I contemplated a way to encourage her departure from the company and leave me alone. Seeing her face every single morning filled me with loathing, exacerbating my pain. Ironically, she ultimately orchestrated her own departure from the company, sparing me from having to get directly involved. Here's what unfolded. Towards the end of the year, our company held a fundraiser, weeks before closing out the fiscal year. I had no involvement in the planning. My role was simply overseeing the proceedings since it coincided with the company's announcement of a name change. We maintained a strict no alcohol or pills policy, particularly when clients were present. However, as the event got underway, I found myself extinguishing numerous crises, many of which emanated from her department responsible for the presentation. During the meeting, several interns began behaving oddly, displaying signs of intoxication. One intern even dozed off at a table reserved for an important investor. It was evident that something was amiss, prompting me to instruct my assistant to discreetly remove the intern from the view of the event attendees. I could detect the scent of alcohol on some of the interns, and the CEO appeared equally alarmed. I approached Charlene and requested her assistance with the tasks the interns were responsible for during the event. She adamantly declined, asserting that she was not a lowly intern, as I seemed to believe. I urged her to accompany me to my office as her behavior was causing a scene. However, her response was marked by escalating anger, and she insisted that I was not her supervisor. Her words were somewhat slurred, and her eyes appeared glassy, a departure from her usual demeanor. I promptly informed the CEO that I had observed some of the staff either being under pills or consuming alcohol at the event. I left him in charge of managing the event and engaging the guests while I delved into the unfolding situation. We swiftly administered breathalyzer tests to the interns who had initially denied consuming alcohol, and all of them failed the tests. I inquired about the source of the alcohol, assuring them that I only sought information to avoid getting them into trouble. However, they remained unwilling to divulge any details. I reached a decision that, unless they cooperated and disclosed the information, we would likely terminate their contracts. Eventually, one of them confessed to stealing wine from my office. I was furious and prepared to terminate their employment, but not before they revealed something even more intriguing. They disclosed that my ex-wife had instructed them to acquire the wine for sharing before the event. I couldn't comprehend why she would act so recklessly, knowing the company's strict policy regarding staff alcohol consumption. Even I was prohibited from drinking alcohol while at work. This policy had been implemented because some employees drove to and from work events and could face legal repercussions if found drinking. I summoned her to my office and urged her to admit to her actions, emphasizing that there were witnesses to the incident. She acknowledged her mistake, but explained that she felt the need to drink due to discovering her boyfriend's infidelity. However, I wasn't naive enough to fall for her manipulations. Every word that escaped her lips registered as a falsehood in my mind. It seemed evident to me that she likely intended for the interns to disrupt the event once they were intoxicated. And who would face the consequences for a problematic event? Well, that would be me. I informed her that her actions had sealed her fate and that I would make it exceedingly challenging for her to maintain her employment with the company. She had already received 2 warnings, and a 3rd infraction would result in her termination. I outlined the humiliation she would endure once everyone discovered her attempted event sabotage, despite her hard work on it. Watching her squirm and scramble for excuses brought me a sense of satisfaction. I instructed her to leave for the remainder of the day, indicating that we would address the matter the following day. She broke into tears in my office, pleading for her job and expressing remorse for stealing the client's wine from Yofus. She claimed ignorance regarding the intern's excessive drinking and vowed to reimburse the expenses if I would just pardon her. I calculated the cost for her, leaving her stunned. She proceeded to beg me to let the matter go, acknowledging that my rigorous stance was influenced by our tumultuous history and expressing a desire to mend our relationship. I reminded her of how her previous unfounded accusations had isolated me, resulting in her obtaining my house, depriving me of my daughter, and taking away shared custody of her with her father. She no longer had the house either, hence her relocation to a different city. Once upon a time, I might have sympathized or even felt sorry for her, considering how chaotic her life had become. However, I had ceased to care. She departed for home, and I resumed managing our fundraiser. By day's end, I had apprised her superiors of her transgressions, and they were incensed, contemplating immediate termination. I, on the contrary, desired to subject her to a protracted and humiliating disciplinary process. I relished the authority to determine the trajectory of her future within the company, just as she had dictated mine all those years ago. The following morning, an email of resignation arrived from her end. Although she wished to resign with immediate effect, I had different intentions in mind. The entire office was now aware of her transgressions, and she needed to address the company. I compelled her to complete a 2-week notice period before her departure. Additionally, the company sent her an invoice for the alcohol pilfered by the intern. I contemplated filing theft charges against her if she failed to remit the owed sum. During her 2-week notice period, I ensured her days were arduous. I did her a favor by assigning her an abundance of work, thus sparing her from facing her displeased colleagues who had diligently organized the event. She endured considerable misery throughout her final 14 days at the office. On the last day, as she packed her belongings, she paid me the outstanding amount for the wine. She expressed the hope that I found satisfaction now that she was unemployed. I conveyed to her that the decision to resign was hers to make. At least this way, she could preserve some of her dignity, which would have been compromised if I had terminated her employment. When she ultimately departed from the company, I felt an immense sense of relief, akin to wanting to throw a celebratory gathering. I found contentment in the fact that she had now experienced a loss similar to what I had endured in the past. Perhaps she could embark on a fresh start at a different company. However, she would be unable to use our company as a reference during her job search. Months later, I had completely forgotten about her when I was en route to a work-related meeting. Spotting her on the streets, amidst the company of jobless and homeless individuals soliciting employment or assistance, I almost failed to recognize her. To be frank, she appeared utterly disheveled, and her appearance was a stark contrast to her previous self. I pondered how she had plummeted to such depths when she once possessed so much. Even when I had lost everything, I had not found myself destitute on the streets. This predicament seemed to be a consequence of her own actions, as life appeared to be exacting retribution for the falsehood she had disseminated about me, which had cost me everything. It appeared to be a tale of karma coming full circle. I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe I went too far in my treatment of my ex-wife? Or do you think she deserved everything she got?
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
Please understand, I'm not here for judgment. I'm aware that what I did was a mistake, and I've been dealing with the consequences ever since. I'm simply seeking a safe space to share my experiences. My name is Isabella, and I'm a 28-year-old woman. I've been married to my husband Owen, a 29-year-old man, for around 4 years, and we were in a relationship for 2 years prior to that. Owen and I initially crossed paths purely by chance at a cozy bookstore in the city. I was engrossed in a poetry book called Lost in the Words, and Owen, immersed in a classic novel, accidentally bumped into me. We shared a chuckle about the book collision, and that marked the beginning of our journey. Our conversation was simple, centered around our literary interests, but it somehow evolved into a genuine connection. Owen's amiable demeanor and his fascination with my poetry turned the bookstore into a welcoming haven where we could truly be ourselves. As we ventured beyond the bookstore, the city became our playground. We frequented local cafes, explored art exhibitions, and strolled through parks hand in hand. Each step felt like an exploration, not only of the city, but also of each other's worlds. With Owen, it was more profound than merely a relationship. It felt like discovering a partner who truly understood me. That quaint bookstore became our special place where our story originated, serving as a reminder that meaningful connections can sometimes emerge in the most unexpected locations. Our inaugural date marked the beginning of a remarkable love story. We decided to keep it low-key, opting for a delightful Italian restaurant tucked away on a serene street. I was quite anxious. Owen had arrived first, welcoming me with a warm smile. His choice of an Italian eatery showed his attentiveness to our discussions about food preferences. Once we settled into a cozy corner, the ambiance was perfect, with gentle lighting, the soft murmur of conversations in the background, and the delightful scent of Italian herbs wafting through the air. Conversation flowed effortlessly, transitioning from casual chatter to more profound topics. Owen shared childhood anecdotes, and I found myself opening up about my aspirations and dreams. Owen had a knack for making me laugh, effortlessly making everything feel relaxed and natural. When our meals arrived, it became a joint effort to navigate the menu. We shared bites, exchanged playful remarks about our culinary quirks, and it became evident that we were perfectly in sync. As the evening progressed, Owen reached across the table, and our hands met in the middle. Simple as it was, it conveyed volumes. In that restaurant, we silently acknowledged that this wasn't just any ordinary date. It was the inception of something beautiful. After our meal, we embarked on an impromptu stroll through the city. The night air was crisp, and the city's lights provided the backdrop for our post-dinner adventure. Walking hand in hand, we exchanged stories and shared meaningful glances that conveyed more than words ever could. Our initial date concluded with a heartfelt hug and plans for more get-togethers. Fast forward years later, and our relationship remains exceptional. We still prioritize weekly dates and thoroughly enjoy each other's company. From the moment we started hanging out in high school, Owen became my best friend, a bond that remains unaltered to this day. While I do have a girlfriend who I consider my best friend, especially outside of my marriage, nothing surpasses the friendship I share with my husband. Over the years, we've encountered some challenges, but nothing too severe. There are areas where both of us need to make improvements. But these are not issues that threaten our relationship. They are simply aspects we must work on to become better individuals and better partners. We both understand that perfection is unattainable. Currently, we don't have any children, but we plan to start trying soon. We are both employed, and although I earn a decent income, Owen's earnings surpass mine. He also owns our house. Despite occasional bouts of unemployment in the past, with each of us supporting the other during those times, there has never been any financial animosity, regardless of who was the primary earner. Our marriage has withstood challenges such as depression, alcoholism, and a few physical health conditions, all of which we've supported each other through. We make a great team. Our bed life is vibrant and active. A dry spell for us consists of going a work week without intimacy due to exhaustion, though such occurrences are infrequent. We have great relationships with each other's families, and my family has formed a strong bond with my husband. To them, he's like another son and brother. He exceeds all my expectations as a husband, and my love for him is genuine. Both of us have experienced attraction to others in the past, although we've never discussed it with each other. We understand that it's a normal occurrence, and it has never been too intense before. When I've found myself developing feelings for someone I interact with frequently, it usually doesn't take much to shake off those emotions. However, this time was different. I was strongly drawn to a coworker who was not only incredibly attractive but also very friendly, and I genuinely enjoyed his company. We both joined the company at around the same time, approximately 8 months ago, and endured a few weeks of training together, which proved to be a challenging experience for me. My feelings for him developed rapidly, and I'm certain I blushed several times when he flashed that charming smile. This would have been embarrassing enough if I were single, purely due to the fact that we were colleagues. However, I am married, and I feel that this reflects poorly on me. Although we no longer work directly together, our departments are adjacent, and he would occasionally pass through my section. He would often place his hand on my shoulder and give it a friendly squeeze as he walked by, always accompanied by that smile. While I engaged in conversation when we crossed paths or attended work events together, I maintained a similar level of interaction with most of my colleagues. We aren't connected on social media, haven't exchanged phone numbers, and don't socialize outside of work. I've been invited to a nearby bar by him and a few others on a couple of occasions, but I declined. Working in a male-dominated field, it didn't feel right to be the only woman at the bar with a group of guys, especially when I have these feelings for one of them. I've actively avoided his workplace floor whenever possible, and if we happen to be on lunch break at the same time, I exchange greetings as I pass by, but quickly grab my belongings and dine on the patio or another floor. I've been attempting to suppress my thoughts about him or remind myself of the irrationality of my emotions. But I can't seem to shake this feeling. I'm afraid I might make a foolish mistake and let passion override my judgment, despite my strong belief that the typical excuses people use for one-time indiscretions are invalid. I'm striving to maintain control over my actions and would never be so cruel to my husband. However, I'm at a loss as to how to dispel these emotions. The last time I felt such intense desire for someone was when I met my husband. We instantly became great friends and spent time together, even fooling around for about a year before taking our relationship seriously. I was quite young when we got together, and my previous relationships were never very serious. I had never experienced such a strong attraction to someone before, and I didn't think it was possible with anyone else. I'm not comparing my husband to my coworker or vice versa. That's not my intention here. I've been able to easily brush off any feelings that have arisen for someone else in the past. Yet with this guy, it doesn't matter what I do. When I think about him, it's challenging to get him out of my mind, regardless of my surroundings. There have been weeks when I haven't run into him, and he doesn't cross my mind during those times. However, there are moments when I catch a glimpse of him while walking into work, and my heart starts racing. I find myself longing to be near him, and I desperately wish these feelings would dissipate. It's like I've regressed to high school, except instead of daydreaming in class, I'm battling to keep this guy out of my thoughts and stay focused on my work. I understand that Reddit values full disclosure, but this wasn't something I felt comfortable discussing with my husband. These emotions weren't stemming from any neglect or deficiency in our relationship. I didn't feel like I was lacking anything by being with him. Moreover, there was nothing he could do to resolve this for me. If he were experiencing similar feelings for someone else, I can genuinely say I wouldn't want to hear about it. However, if he felt neglected or that my actions were driving him to seek affection elsewhere, that would be a different story. I realized that this situation would deeply affect him, and I didn't want him to feel uneasy during the 40 to 50 hours a week I spend in the same building with this guy, when there's nothing my husband could do or say to change how I feel, and there's no risk of me crossing any boundaries. I just couldn't see any reason to introduce tension into my marriage when there was no underlying issue. Our workplace comprises approximately 25% to 30% female employees, with the majority being male. We all engage in friendly banter and playful interactions, and it's not just the guys here showing affection toward the women. The extent of physical contact I've experienced from any of the male colleagues has been limited to a pat on the back for a job well done, firm handshakes, or a pat on the shoulder to get their attention while passing by to use the copier. On the other hand, I've had female coworkers playfully tousle my hair as they run past, similar to how I interact with my sisters. This isn't a formal office environment, but it's not an HR nightmare either. In light of my strong reaction to my coworker, even with just eye contact, I decided it was necessary to create some distance between us. However, upon returning to work after the weekend, I discovered that he had requested a transfer to my department and had been added to my team. Not a problem, I thought. I'm an adult, and I can handle this maturely. Surprisingly, the time away to clear my head and reevaluate where I was investing my energy had a more significant impact than I expected. Things took a somewhat peculiar turn. He started getting me coffee when he picked up his own, mainly because I had taken on a new project and was arriving earlier and staying later than usual. Strangely, he didn't extend this gesture to anyone else with increased workloads. Lunch breaks seemed to align more frequently, and I received friend requests on social media from him, which I promptly declined, among other things. I felt like he was standing a bit too close for comfort, although I still wondered if I was reading too much into it. It was perplexing and challenging since I had no desire for these feelings, yet I found myself inexplicably drawn to him, longing to sever this connection. I typically park near the smoking section due to my smoking habit and preference for proximity. One evening, while I was walking to my car, he intercepted me and asked for a cigarette, initiating a conversation that lasted a few minutes. Then, he broached an uncomfortable topic, confessing that he had been attracted to me since our first encounter and that working closely with me had revealed genuine feelings. He assured me that he understood I was married and would respect any boundaries I established. However, he admitted that he had never felt this strongly about someone before and couldn't bear the uncertainty of what-ifs. It turns out he took things a step further by ending his relationship with his girlfriend. Currently, he's staying with his parents for a few weeks while he arranges for a new place. He expressed feeling a connection between us and believed it wasn't one-sided. I clarified that I am happily married and that he shouldn't misconstrue my friendliness as flirtation. I also emphasized the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries with coworkers. I requested some distance and made it clear that since we are coworkers, not friends, there was no need to discuss this matter further unless it pertained to work. I left the conversation, and he seemed somewhat defeated, offering an apology for crossing the line. So there I was, entangled in these complex emotions for a coworker who seemed like a character from a movie. Honestly, he had a magnetic pull on me, evoking a range of feelings. However, here's the catch. I'm married and committed. Dealing with this crush felt like walking a tightrope, desperately trying not to fall into a pit of poor choices. I recognized that I couldn't jeopardize my marriage, even though the attraction was undeniably strong. After some internal deliberation, I decided to be candid with my coworker. I told him, I have feelings for you, but I can't risk my marriage. It was a difficult conversation, and I could sense our connection dimming a bit. In an effort not to completely crush him, I asked for some time to sort through my thoughts. He was understanding and gave me the space I needed. On my way home, my mind was racing. I knew I would hurt my husband, and that realization was painful. However, deep down, I understood that I couldn't let this attraction jeopardize what I had with him. My husband was away on a work trip, and I returned home to an empty house, experiencing a peculiar mix of emotions that I hadn't felt since the situation began. Sleeping alone became a challenge, and the whole ordeal was chaotic. After a restless night, I had an epiphany. Instead of engaging in secrecy and breaking promises, what if I could persuade my husband to consider opening up our relationship a bit? We weren't exactly thrill seekers, but I believed a gentle nudge might be just what we needed. The plan was straightforward. Discuss the idea of having an open relationship with my husband. It seemed like a fair proposition to me. I could explore things with my coworker without crossing into the realm of infidelity. So the following day, when my husband returned from his business trip, I decided to have that heart-to-heart conversation to see if he'd be willing to consider this unconventional solution. I also recognized that I couldn't disclose my crush on my coworker to my husband, as he would never agree to an open relationship if he knew. Therefore, if he inquired about my sudden desire to open up our relationship, I had prepared a response. I would explain that I had grown somewhat restless and was seeking a bit of adventure. The next day arrived, and my husband texted me that he was back from his business trip. I was at work and replied that I would head straight home after my shift because I needed to discuss something. Knowing he could sometimes jump to conclusions, I reassured him that it wasn't anything urgent or negative. He sighed in relief and replied, "Okay." When my workday finally concluded, I hurried home. To my surprise, my husband had prepared dinner, and he nailed it. Italian, my favorite cuisine. We sat down, and he gave me inquisitive looks, probably wondering what was on my mind. After we finished eating, I felt it was time to reveal my intentions. I chose my words carefully, aiming to be both cautious and assertive. I began by expressing my love for him and emphasizing how our marriage was one of the most precious aspects of my life. He listened attentively as I continued, mentioning that I had been feeling somewhat bored lately and thought that a little adventure could be beneficial. He appeared puzzled, despite our previously robust bed life. Seeking clarity, he inquired about my intentions. This was my moment, and I took a deep breath, mustering the courage to ask, "How would you feel about opening our marriage?" My husband's countenance remained impassive, and he calmly requested that I repeat myself, though I sensed he had absorbed every word. It wasn't unfamiliar. Even during our dating days, he had a talent for maintaining an inscrutable poker face. I assumed he wanted me to reiterate to confirm there was no misunderstanding. Thus, I collected my thoughts and restated my question, inquiring about his thoughts on opening our marriage. To say my husband was shocked would be an understatement. Angry wouldn't even begin to describe it. He sprang up from the couch, questioning my sanity and demanding an explanation. The intensity of his reaction caught me off guard. In an attempt to elucidate, I explained that I believed an open marriage could inject some excitement into our relationship. However, he remained skeptical, accusing me of deceit and asserting that it was a veiled excuse to justify infidelity. My husband unleashed a torrent of words that cut deeply, his skill with language causing tears to stream down my face within seconds. I implored him to stop, vehemently assuring him that infidelity was the farthest thing from my mind. What else could I say? But he remained unconvinced, convinced that I was merely concealing my true intentions, intensifying the flow of tears. Then, he dropped a bombshell, declaring that this entire situation made him reconsider our marriage. That revelation hit me like a ton of bricks, and I pleaded even more desperately. I tried to retract everything, urging him to forget that I had ever broached the subject. However, he refused to let it go. In his view, my suggestion of an open marriage indicated that I had contemplated cheating for quite some time. It felt like a sudden blow to my emotions. Then came the bombshell. He needed space. I resisted, but he remained resolute and even threatened to evict me. More tears flowed. He proposed that I go stay with my sister or parents, affording him the opportunity to assess what all of this meant for our future. He declared that trust had evaporated and that he no longer had faith in me. The gravity of those words hit me profoundly. Accepting the reality of my departure, I knew my husband's tranquil demeanor often transformed into an impenetrable wall of anger. When he reached that point, reasoning with him was futile. All one could do was await the passing of the storm to engage in a rational conversation. Consequently, I packed my essentials and headed to my sister's place. She was taken aback, as I had only sent her a text about my impending visit. Fortunately, we shared a close bond, and she welcomed me with open arms. As I poured my heart out, I divulged all the details of the confrontation with my husband. She found it difficult to believe. Asking the tough questions, my sister probed whether I had intentions of cheating. Unable to deceive her, I confessed about the coworker who had caught my eye. Disappointment radiated from her, and she wasted no time calling our parents to relay the news. They too expressed their disappointment, but assured me of their willingness to help me communicate with my husband. Regardless of my efforts or those of my family, my husband appeared to vanish into thin air, effectively ghosting me for an unrelenting 3 months. There was not a single word from him, no response to texts, and no acknowledgement when we showed up at his place. It seemed as though he had vanished into thin air, leaving us with unanswered questions and a feeling of helplessness. My concern grew, accompanied by anger. I called in sick to work multiple times, finding it impossible to concentrate when I did make it to the office, seething with resentment towards my coworker. The attraction I once had for him faded away, and I came to realize that he was the root cause of this entire debacle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my husband broke his silence. I had hoped that it signaled a decrease in his anger and the possibility of forgiveness. However, that wasn't the case. Instead, he delivered a bombshell through a text. He apologized for ghosting me and then dropped the bombshell that he wanted a divorce. There was no discussion, no closure, just a cold announcement. Devastated, I spent the entire day in tears, calling in sick to work once again. My sister stayed by my side, attempting to console me, but the pain was unbearable. How could I move forward without the man I loved so deeply? The future seemed bleak without my husband, and I felt completely lost. After crying for a while, I had to confront the reality that my husband wasn't coming back. I had made a massive mistake, and the blame was squarely on my shoulders. He was avoiding me like the plague, but he did reach out to my parents, providing them with a full explanation, making it abundantly clear that attempting to reconcile was a lost cause. He even mentioned that couples therapy wouldn't mend the mess. Then he sent me a text, instructing me to sign the divorce papers for a swift and cost-effective breakup. And just like that, he vanished from my life. No more constant contact, no responses to my texts. It's incredibly painful to accept that this marks the end of our relationship, and it's entirely my fault. Despite the chaos, I'm back to my usual routine at work, although I've reduced the number of sick days I used to take. As for that coworker, yes, he's still physically attractive, but now I find him more repulsive and disgusting. He's the one who triggered this entire disaster by approaching me in the parking lot, and I'll never forgive him for that. It appears he's realized this, as he's now going out of his way to please me. However, I'm not giving him the time of day. It's a bit challenging since we're in the same department, but I'm making it abundantly clear. No acknowledgement, no interaction. I've had my fill of his role in this mess. I didn't go into work today, but I did receive an email from my coworker. It starts with what appears to be a genuine apology and then an offer to take me out for dinner this weekend to make amends. I replied saying, "Your advances have disrupted my marriage, and I want to reiterate that I am not interested in pursuing anything with you outside of work." His second email was another apology, while reiterating that the offer for dinner as friends to make amends was still open. I chose not to respond to the second message, and he hasn't reached out again today. I find myself in a peculiar situation, developing a stronger aversion to my coworker, while still experiencing those strange, primal feelings. I'm planning a quiet dinner in and some Netflix and chill when my sister gets home. I'm also considering requesting a department change when the opportunity arises. I've spent some time browsing job listings, but I genuinely enjoy where I work, so I don't believe that's the best solution.